Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me here. I have to say that been I think a 2-year absence from when I did a rash of talks after Wild East launched, and then after lockdown ended, and it became quite the thing for me to go to places. I have to say, not with as many people as this, but around and about. It's very heartwarming and enjoyable. And then we've had a bit of an interregnum, I suppose you might say. The world has sort of shifted its focus away. If you remember, lockdown was an extraordinary time for all of us, but extraordinary in as much that really the whole world, through social media and through all media and all our experiences, seemed to slow down and focus on nature. And it was lucky for us because we launched into that window. But after lockdown, the world has obviously gone back up to full speed, and this sort of thing has become a smaller part of our everyday. But equally, we kind of ran out of what little money we had, and ran out of the kind of initial burst of good media. And I do want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But what I really want to start with is to really thank you to really Jake and Andy from Wild Patch, and I know a lot of you. I think a lot of you are connected with that too, because I mean, absolutely, there's no, we're all inspired by something, and Wild Patch is definitely part of the kind of Wildies sort of creation story, really. So we owe a big debt to that, and coming round to see what particularly Andy and Jake were doing was a big catalyst for us to thinking, well, let's try and take this into a bigger thing. So just to rewind a bit before we get started on these, I find slides tend to dominate talks and in a way distract from talking. But so why Wild East? Well, absolutely Wild Patch. But Ollie and Argus and I were kind of classic kind of, fairly privileged, eco-anxious farmers, or at least people for whom farming was a big part of our lives. I don't pretend to be a very good tractor driver. I don't pretend to earn all my existence through farming, but it runs through us as we've grown up on farms. We love being on the land. And we took a trip. In fact, I made them take a trip, I think it's probably more accurate, to see a guy that I've been to see in London called Paul Lister, who had started something called the European Nature Trust, and a few people mentioned him. And he has a place up in Scotland, a place called Allerdale, but it's pretty far north, and it has got a nice chunk of a sort of old world sort of Caledonian forest. It was too far down the valley to get felled, so it's a really special spot. And we in fact the weekend there was very interesting, but actually it was a journey, the 8 hours up and down with us chewing the fat. And really the central point was we'd looked at Carpathia, which is for those of you who don't know, I haven't got information on that, but it's essentially a big rewilding project across Romania, a huge chunk of unspoilt, mostly oak woodland, and still it's got bears and wolves and snow-capped mountains. We'd obviously, a lot of you have been inspired by the Yellowstone and the return of wolves back in the 90s, I think, or early 2000s, and it could be Tompkins Conservation in Chile. There's another huge project, but all of these, and actually, to be fair, the Dutch, much more like us across the way with Oostvaardersplassen, and roughly the right saying, and I suppose what we were vexed by was two things really. Unless it's all very well what we're doing on our farms, and every farm is different, but unless society moves with us, then we're going to keep failing. It's not like we haven't been spending hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money on conservation within farming for decades, and it probably has done some good, but it certainly hasn't arrested decline. And so, but how do we do that? How do we take the romance, if you like, and the drama and the visual I'm talking about of any of those projects, Carpathia, Tompkins, they've got literally snow-capped mountains, bears and wolves and cascading rivers and wonderful, I mean, you can hardly take a bad photo in those places. How do we do that in flat, featureless, farmed East Anglia? Now, the answer now that 4 years on, is with great difficulty, in fact. But you know, in actual fact, joking apart, as you all know, wild east, as I like to call it, is, in fact, it's difficult to see it because of the nature of the landscape, but it is, of course, much more diverse. We don't have apex predators, but we are more diverse with the brecks and the sandlings, and the coastal fringe, the broads, and of course the farmland than most of those places are, which are quite, you know, well, I mean, Carpathia is kind of one type of landscape largely. So it's all here. It's just a question of bringing it to life. And the answer really was through people, actually. I mean, we recognise that it had to be people powered, and so and therefore, what came out of that journey was, let's make a map and call it the Map of Dreams. It was a shamelessly romantic title. It was deliberately like that, because actually our little dream was only going to be made rich and real by the thousands and hopefully tens of thousands of dreams or actions, interventions, like Wild Patch, of people across the region that then becomes a big voice. So that's kind of what the things that kind of got us, and actually got us to commit to Wild East. And then I suppose the other part just was artistic, as in we looked at the map of our region, and we'd been inspired. Paul Lister, the guy in Scotland, has been talking about wolves, and he was younger. You know, when he was younger, he was real kind of cage rattler about wolves. Got to have wolves, got to have wolves, and kind of upset all the sort of slower moving conservation movement and everybody else, actually. And he's a bit more sanguine about it now. But the point is talking about wolves gets column inches in the paper. It gets a conversation going in the way that talking about lynx does. It's divisive, maybe, but it's easier to get people's attention than talking about something much more important, which is what's going on in the soil. We've all kind of woken up to this now. But so lynx, our emblem, the wild east, was our lowland predator. So what does success look like, I guess, in 20, 40, 50 years' time, is leaving a landscape behind that might, in fact, be able to host a predator like lynx. So yeah, so the first incarnation of the Map of Dreams, someone said to me, was harder to get onto than robbing a bank, and I think that was a fair assessment. We were very people were incredibly generous and kind. It gave us the technology or what we were trying to do here, but to build a map. But it was pretty crude and difficult to use, and then we started a sort of social media feed. So that was, we're talking about now, summer, August 2020, and we were, as I say, we were very lucky at that beginning point because the world was listening. We couldn't get enough media. I mean, free media. If I was starting a business of any other kind, it was just like the best PR party you could ever get. Everyone wanted to write an article, and we were very flattered. We got into rooms and meetings with Natural England and other, the Wildlife Trusts, and seemed to be taken much more seriously than we deserved, because we were just three. I always think of it as like the Wizard of Oz. I mean, we were behind the curtain, just playing on a machine without any real skills. So that's how it started, and that gave it life, and really to bring it kind of up to date. I haven't done a talk like this for, I mean, I'm not sure, but 18 months to 2 years, and part of that is because we, kind of ran out of steam, in the sense that, and this is mission critical, because I think this is really the most important thing. We, like any business, in the end, if you're selling blue chairs and the market wants red chairs, you either start selling red chairs or you go out of business. And in charity, of course, is the same. Wherever we went to try and raise money, whether it was private or public, companies, our story was, look, we've got this map, we want to celebrate people's stories, so it's media. We nearly called ourselves Wild East Media. And it wasn't so much a lack of will, but what it took us so long to work out is, in terms of two interlocking pieces of a puzzle, we just were incredibly naive at how to really sell that story well, or better still, how not to sell it and say something totally different to get the money anyway. Because, whether you go to the back of a wind power, one of the wind powers around our coast, for example, they've all got a lot of dollar to spend. They're all creating a lot of a lot of energy, a lot of low carbon energy, but also a lot of disruption. Some of you will know about that, as is Sizewell, as are the solar farms. So we've been focusing on the low carbon energy sector in the east because it's an obvious target. But what they want to do, and this is important too, is they want to give us money to plant some trees. Here you go, here's money to plant some trees. And we were just saying, no, we don't want to plant any trees. We want to talk about planting trees, basically. I mean, that's crudely right, and it just was an exhausting kind of. We didn't really get much money. We kept taking money to do other projects. Some really good ones. Natural England sponsored some great sort of community-led interventions, very much like what you're doing around and about. And they're always rewarding, but it's like 10 grand here, 15 grand there. But what we really want to be doing is growing the Map of Dreams, because that really was the only important thing at the beginning and remains for me. Because I do think, and I will come back to this, is that the hugely missing part of this whole sector is media, in the sense that, you know, we've got David Attenborough at the top of the tree, his latest series you've probably been watching, Asia, and we used to wait, let's face it, until very recently, we used to wait 10 years between blue planets. And everyone got a huge shot of adrenaline, thought, oh my God, I live in a beautiful world, I've got to do something. And that was it. And then you're back onto going part, I know you're all TikTokers, going through TikTok, watching absolute junk and buying junk and thinking about everything else apart from that. So that was always the point. We felt we needed to make it more fun and accessible and lower level, what we call gong over dinner, and that remains the case. So that's kind of, I just wanted to sort of kind of set the scene about where we started, where we hit a wall. The reason we now have a wall is we now do have, in the last 6 months, and which is why I said yes to this, because we've had a bit of money, we've recreated our website, social media is now active again, and I'll talk more about that as we go. So I've got to play you this, because actually there's something that it sort of sums up what I've been saying. Oh.
We are committed to nature recovery.
It's such a great way for people like us to come together, have an incentive for the future.
Before it plays again, I've got to find a way of moving this on. I don't know how to do that quite. Where's the mouse? Oh, here we go. Is that the next slide? No? Oops. Sorry, this is a quick... Oh yeah. Okay, phew. So that, for a moment there, you got some pretty good speakers. It's a bit like a nightclub. But the point of that, and I appreciate, actually that's nice to see some, you know, younger people in the audience, all young, but so shamelessly and deliberately. So that is a piece of media we put together, which we've now had some funding. And after that few years of, you know, most people who own land or who control land have access to land, you know, great and small, from backyard, schoolyard, churchyard, are house owners, and, you know, not the, getting, this is obviously aimed at slightly at a audience below. We've deliberately decided after, we thought all our big farming friends would say, oh yeah, I'll be on the Map of Dreams, I'm doing some really good stuff. All of them are, I mean, you know, but they all want to talk about themselves, some of them, or they're, you know, I hate to say it, but quite a few people just, yeah, it was quite, we felt that the harder part would be selling this to everybody else, and that landowners, farmers would just think, how cool, this is great, I can just put a short video up about what good I'm doing. I think we were a bit naive about the launch in the Guardian. Some of you might have seen was a bit abrasive, and I guess you kind of go for conservation-minded, the people, you know, a lot of you, or you go for Telegraph and a few big landowners. And maybe we got that wrong, but we've decided over the last couple of years to try and make it much easier. So I mentioned about the tech. We've now, the other thing I thought was quite amusing there, I don't know where they found those people in Norwich, but they seem to be the two poshest girls that they could put, or people they could ever find in the middle of Norwich, talking about nature recovery, which was, again, slightly narrower than we thought. But anyway, that's now on the website, and is a kind of useful piece of media that we can use to try and tell the story, but also make it current. And moving on to the Map of Dreams, the other big change really is to make it easier, which we were talking about earlier, but also we kind of realise that, you know, let's say there's very crudely a million people per county. I mean, it's not exactly right, but Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, obviously a lot more, Herts, Cambridge, but there's sort of very roughly 5 million people in the Wild East as a region. To make a movement, you need a lot of those people are not yet accessing land. They might be in a household, but so we wanted to make it easier so people could just sign the map, you know, to pledge their support, if you like, or sign the map and tell us what they're doing as in on their land, if they're doing a bit of rewilding, or an orchard, or a community project, or a vicar in his churchyard. So it's now allows for both. So we wanted, that would allow us to go from, you know, a relatively small number of people who actually have access to land to potentially a relatively large number of people who just are part of it because they want to be part of something current. I mean, we've sort of talked about this now, but that's pretty much why we created it, and still the reason. I think I'm just going to try that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have got quite a few videos of people, but I didn't want to chew up all the time playing those. And Andy is, in fact, one of those. You might have seen him starring. But the best part, for sure, for me and also those people, I mean, Ollie and Argus, has been this rather disarming opportunity, really, to go and meet whoever they may be. I mean, there are a few thousand, but I of course have not been to all of them, but just lots and lots of projects. And in a way, in the end, I mean, I'd love to be able to value this, but let's say take Holcombe or Sandringham as the sort of emblematically the biggest, most sort of important estates who are doing their own stuff, and they've got their own media, and they don't need to talk to anyone else. But for all their acres, you know, I reckon one pledge in Great Yarmouth or Lowestoft in a backyard is actually more powerful for the story, because they're doing it anyway, and there's many more people with backyards in Lowestoft and Yarmouth and Cambridge and everywhere else. That's how the majority are. So we've been sort of inevitably focusing on all sorts of community projects, people in their back gardens, and each film is just a joy to do, a joy to meet the people, and a real tonic. It's not actually why we started, but it's actually become I mean, people talk about mental health maybe too much these days, but if there was ever anything wrong with mine, my father used to love going around the garden talking to people in the garden, and he'd come back and he said, feel much better after a stressful day. Well, this is my version of that. It's become a really important part. So that's, you know, so behind those dots on the map lie videos, or not always, sometimes just photos, but really that's the way people consume media now. So videos, and those stories hopefully inspire more stories. That's kind of the point. And so the other sort of new thing that we've started is we love, or Wild East loves. We loves. So along that journey, we and me as a farmer too, but know lots of food producers, campsites, eco B&Bs or Airbnbs, and you know, all sorts of other people that we want to celebrate. So they don't all need us, but we've kind of realised that what we hadn't been really focused on at the beginning is the potential for tourism. So if you were sitting in London or coming, most of this area, you know, Norfolk is fed from the Midlands traditionally, and Suffolk, people coming up through London through Essex into Suffolk. So if you're coming in to this area, we definitely would like to try and start working with the East of England Tourism. We haven't done that yet, but to create a map where people who care can either visit some farms. Some of you are farmers, open for visits, whether it's camping, farming, food producers, farm shops, all that kind of stuff, on a page called We Loves, and so that's new and it's just in its infancy. But again, to try and make it more inclusive, more open, I think we did start it as 3 farmers, and we were thinking we must ring up our farming friends and say, will you be on the Map of Dreams? That was 4 years ago. Most of them said, actually I can't say what they said, but no, you're going to ruin my shoot, or I don't know, whatever it was. And then the other thing, and I know you, and again, another inspiration piece from you, so you don't need to teach you about this, but we've been funded. I have to say, I hate this part, because there's so many toolkits. RSPB, I don't know what Jake is, every self-respecting conservation organisation has produced and reproduced. And I kind of always say to people when I go to meet them, and they always say, well, what am I going to do? And I don't know if any of you watched, I'm sure you all watched Pretty Woman, the film originally, it was such a big hit. But there's a moment when Julia Roberts takes Richard Gere out, he's in his suit, and takes his shoes and socks off and makes him walk on the grass, because he's such a corporate beast to her that he just has lost any sense of his feelings really. And I kind of feel that actually most of us do know what to do. I mean, obviously you do, because you're farmers and you're already in this space, but I hate the idea of telling people what they should do. And there's a wonderful book by someone called Juliet Blaxland, who lived in the easternmost house with a book that she wrote, living on the Benneker estate, which is now, I think, fallen into the sea. But it was a diary of her last year, and she had read about rewilding and basically wrote that she said she used a spade to sort of rootle a bit like a pig, and then she had a thick glove and sort of tore at the longer grass as if like a cow, and then used his shears to nip like a sheep. And it just was very beautifully written. But that, we don't need. I mean, I've done them and we're delighted, but I'm not convinced we need too many more toolkits. But if someone's going to pay me to make them, then I'm happy to make them. So that's another part. But I do accept there are a lot of people who do want to know and need to feel a reference point that what is someone else doing, particularly schools and then I just wanted to go back to the origin story. When we started, we looked at a lovely old map that we went to see the records office, but you know the area well enough. But you look at whether it's the Brecks or the Sandlings in 1930 and 1950 and now, or the waterscape going back much further, sort of, obviously before we drained the land, but 17th century to now. It doesn't really matter or hedgerows. You look at field systems on old maps, and you know the story. Fields are much bigger, there's much less water, there's much less woodland, and so on. So we kind of, and Brecks and Sandlings too. So we kind of, that fragmented landscape, we kind of looked at it, and we kind of thought, well, what's a good target? And I think we kind of, Natural England said, well, look, it's hard to judge how much land, exactly how much land is either in stewardship or, not hard farmed or hard golf course or hard gardened or whatever it might be. But it's a sort of few percent, 3 or 4 or 5%, wherever you cut the cake. We thought, okay, well, 20 seems achievable over the long term, gradually. And we felt we needed to justify or simplify what does that look like. And we just very crudely thought, well, if we talk about 5% water, we need more water for agriculture, we need more water for nature and reintroduction projects like Dalmatian pelicans or whatever there might be, and for people, particularly for the growth of people around the West Anglia region. They've got some super reservoirs to build. So 5% water, 5% woodland. We're the least wooded region for obvious reasons, we all know, but it wouldn't be a bad thing to get up to the national average. And that actually is about 5%. We don't want to get too tied up on percentages. 5% wild edges. So this brings me on to this slide. So this is the thing that I thought was the easiest sell in the world for farmers. And of course, all farms are different, all fields are different, and the scale of each farm is different. And it's obviously, but if you just, Natural England gave us a piece of data for all the hedgerows, nationally actually. And you know the story, we've lost about half. We've still got this incredible living network of hedges. Now, they were never put there for nature, but they are where nature might cling on within our hard-working farm landscapes. We need the hard-working farm landscapes, but rewilding in a big scale in this part of the world is, well, it suits around Fritton Lake, and we can talk about that later, but it's not going to happen, probably shouldn't happen. But wilding within the field system seems like so easy. And when you save time, save carbon, save money, save nature, and we've been doing this at home, but if you take the principle that what we worked out was if every farmer, and again, going back to that point, every farmer is different, and every field is different really as well, but if you took an average and everyone gave 10 metres crop to crop and let what lies between become what we call the wild edge, that we would return about 5% just like that back to nature. And those things will become not just depleted, overcut, oversprayed. You know, I'm not, by the way, talking about all hedges, but you know, a lot of them are managed like this or have been traditionally, but will become kind of cathedrals of biodiversity, just literally pulsating through the land. And meanwhile, the farmer just farms inside the field, the farmer just uses his spray boom to remeasure the field. So all those hard corners, and actually we found at home, and again, they're all different, but of course it's quite an old network. Dad didn't take out any hedges, so we've got loads of wonky fields, and of course you don't really think about it until you look, but if you look with a satellite, there are loads of little slips you can take out and let rewild, if you want to use that word, and now you can get paid for it as a scrub option, so hurrah. So actually I took loads out, and then Natural England came along and said, well, we'll pay you for that. And actually it was meant to be, I genuinely felt this, and I still did, it was my debt to nature, my give back, and I was looking at ways of handcuffing myself so that it would never go back into crop. And I thought, actually, no, I'll take the money. I'm just guilty of being the same as all other farmers. But anyway, so wild edges was a key part of the jigsaw and remains a key part of the jigsaw because it's so easy and it doesn't really require any innovation but a bit of cultural change on the farm. It's also morphed into this thing. This is something we're doing with Sizewell, but they've got this idea of a corridor. Obviously, that's now going ahead, so Leiston to Lowestoft, or even, I think it's actually Felixstowe to Lowestoft, and to use it more of a kind of a terminology that is a wild edge that can pick up a lot of projects along its route. And so it's sort of like a sub-brand that we still see. And then the last 5% is people, people in their gardens, thousands of small micro interventions making up a macro scale. So wild edges, and wilder by the sun, is a kind of, it makes a difference if we all do it. And I'll just let you have a quick read of that, because actually I read this incredible book a couple of years ago by a guy called Dan Barber. He's not on the screen quite, but he's a chef in New York, upstate, and he wrote this incredible book called The Third Plate, and it's really looking at old wheat varieties and food producers all around, quite a few in Europe. And this is rather than mine. I added in brackets a hedge, but it just sums up I think beautifully that importance. We forget that whether it's the edge of the ocean, the edge of a wood, we've all got used to very hard straight lines with a very hard fall off, and it's that scrub, that wild patch that lies between that is absolutely critical and completely missing. If you look at any old book, some of you are old enough to, but any old book that shows a village green, it was a scrubland, and now it's a manicured lawn. And if you put that over 1.5 million hectares, then that's the easiest thing to bring back, and you don't have to plant anything or do anything. So that's a lovely. I think that was to remind myself that we're going on to something slightly different now. So the other thing so going back on the media, the other big play is Wilder by the Sum of Our Parts. We've been using mostly with corporates. So with EAGA, some of you will know EAGA, East of England Energy Group, that represents a lot of the people around our coast, Sizewell, National Grid, and loads more. We have been smashing away for quite a long time to get them to put some budget into a kind of joint advertising, whether that's, now of course that will be mostly social media because that's how it mostly is, but I was obviously child of the 80s, and the big billboards that Saatchi did for Thatcher sort of seared onto my brain, but lots of other billboards, I've used billboards in there just so it's easier, but what we kind of, in that point of, so there's just a series of, these are not live, but what we want to do, and we want them to do, and there are some of the people we've been working with, but is to try and get a sequence of ads going around this region, starting at Liverpool Street, if just taking it as the end of the Wildies, right up and around about, that are, that drop in, if they're digital and are repetitive as in, they stay there or are part of a sequence. So and some of them will be partnership ads. So these are the people supporting this Wilder by the sum of the parts, and then other ones will be messages, whatever they may be. These ones we've done for corporate. It's more to kind of for the corporate sector, because they learned the hard way. I sent them a lot of ones that are quite close to the edge of acceptable, and funny, sort of naughty, funny. When you go to the cinema, the best ads a bit before the film. They're a bit more cheeky and in your face than the ones you see outside of the cinema. I don't know quite why that is, but anyway, after the watershed. But and I think there's room for that, because I think we do need to be punched in the face, made to laugh, but most of all, it needs to be hitting us all the time. So if you go to the cinema, you might go 5 times a year. So you've got your Atma film at Christmas, and then you've got your cinema visits, and then you've got your phone. There's billions and billions of pounds spent on media, from Coca-Cola across all the things that we all know about supermarkets. It doesn't really matter what. Almost none is spent on this sector. I mean, literally nothing. You'd be challenge yourself to find it. So these are for corporate, so they're kind of safe and clean and easy to appreciate. And this is just an imaginary street, I think, in London. I didn't want to upset anyone, any of the really radical ones, but you may see one on our social media soon. This is one of our original slogans. It was in our manifesto, our original manifesto: churchyard, backyard, schoolyard, churchyard, farmyard. Terrible picture, but I put it in for that reason. And then a few of them are on this 20% theme, just to, Mrs. Thatcher, I think, was the one who said, by the way, I'm not a massive Thatcherite, but she did say, I think, that about the time you think you're going mad, repeating yourself is about the time people are hearing you. And so, repeat messages, 20% is what the aim is. We've got to keep that going out. And then this is my favourite one. So this is moving slightly more into the, this is not one of the really rude ones, but it's just more of that, dream one day. I think we might find that everyone will leave them have dreams and go for cover, but it's a beautiful image. Anyway, so we've made a bit of headway. We've got commitment in principle for some of this, so I'm hoping in 2025 we can begin to at least get this on social media. But it would be great to have, a one board in Norwich, one of those ones that rotate, digital ones, and a few around to expand the message. So, I think it brings sort of the kind of Wild East thing up to date. I think I'll talk a bit, we can talk a bit more about it at the end, but I was asked also to talk about cross-referencing that with what is happening at home. I suppose I'd start by saying so I have been there way too long. Literally next year I would have been there 20 years. It took me 10 years of being in absolute awe of my farm manager and his legacy. And anyway, it was a very profitable, successful unit. There's just no way there was any room for criticism. I knew that I wanted to move it along, but I absolutely didn't know how to. And also I absolutely, I think, would say I wasn't frankly brave enough to. It's pretty big, rugby playing farm manager. Not the guy I wanted to have anyway, but he retired and his son had a stint. And then at the end of that first 5 years, so that was 2019. So along that track, Wild East have been forming in my head, but they are in parallel. So I took the leap into a different farm manager, a guy called Rob Raven, who farms at Henstead, so just the other side of me. And I was really lucky, really, because my wife had become friends with someone over the school gate, and I heard that he was a regen farmer, and I went to see him, and he was very clever, because he gave me 3 names of people to go and talk to, sort of all around him, or Suffolk anyway. And I went to him and I said, well, I don't know, they all said the same thing. It was the best sales pitch. He said, well, I don't know why you're talking to me, you want to be talking to Rob. He's regen man. Anyway, his father, he owes a debt to his father, took off, as a young man to the States, the late 70s, mid-late 70s, and got got into the regenerative movement, which was tiny but alive in the States, and came back and put those principles in. They're heavy land, Waveney, heavy soil farm, so it suits non-till farming. It's perfect for that kind of work. And Rob grew up in it. So in my part of North Suffolk, South Norfolk, he is really the guy, and he came to. So he manages Somerleyton. He manages his own farm, and he does a bit for other people too. Regen Rob is what we call him. But so that journey came at the same time. And I think what I like, if we were doing a double act, he's pretty focused. He's a very focused commercial farmer. He's got it is his only business. And I'm, as my dad said, a feckless rewilder, and we've sort of met. And actually what's been really fascinating for me, and I suppose this is the point of the whole journey, is it is a delicate and ever-changing compromise. There's so many, and for those of you farmers, it's a nuance within fields, within seasons, within income streams, and it's very personal too. So I think what has been great is he's helped me sort of really appreciate the kind of the science going into what we're doing, and the output of the farm, but also I've softened him up around leaving a bit of space for nature. So it's been a really happy compromise. So Somerleyton Farms, I've got a bit to talk to you about. By the way, if you want me to shut up, just tell me. I just can't remember what. So this is a block. So the River Waveney running down the blue is the marshes, but the River Waveney sort of coursing through is our sort of southwestern side. At the top of the green is actually the A143, the Yarmouth Road, so that's a hard border for us. And then really it's sort of Village of Lound and Blunderston along the yellow edge. So yellow is tenanted. Funny enough, since I produced this map, one of those has taken that roll-up payment and gone. But it's just there to illustrate in the kind of, if you're talking about the holy trinity of regen farming and not non-till farming, well, you can't grow spuds, and we all like spuds. You can't grow sugar beet. We all like sugar beet. Well, we all like sugar. I mean, this is not going anywhere. So we mapped the farm and said, okay, well, look, the green block is primarily, but not exclusively, is where we're paying our debt to nature. So you can kind of make out the fields. There's about 400 acres of arable land that has come out of production in that block. The rest of it is heathland with wood planted over, and water and marsh. So it's a 1,000-acre block, but it's not 1,000 acres of land given up. It is also, and I think this is really important because I know there's some farmers in the room, it is extremely lucky for me that my tourism operation, which is based at Fritton on the north side of the lake, is where the poorest land. It's heath. A lot of it wasn't ploughed until the 50s, let alone so it's not been under plough that long. And as you know, we never irrigated there because it's water abstraction for the lake, and they didn't really want increasing chemical runoff and or soil erosion. So Dad never extended the main into the lake block. So it was sort of light sort of cereals and not very productive, and particularly not with these hot dry springs we've had of late, and not this year. But so if there was any land for me to take out and rewild, this was it. And it's just a huge gift that it is right where I would want it to be for tourism. It could have been somewhere else, and I probably wouldn't have done it. So I just so NEP, the example you'll know about, they've built tourism onto wilding, and I built wilding onto tourism, so it's sort of a gift. So that's our debt to nature there, and it's a 5,000 acre block, so there's 1,000 acres in the green area. So in very neat terms, that's my 20%. In the rest of it, and I'm sorry that I appreciate not all farmers, but there are some farmers, we've coloured brown for the cultivation. So potatoes is our main kind of dirty crop, if you like. We irrigate, we've got a couple of bores still, we haven't got a reservoir, but that's sort of where we do our 6-year rotation. We do, and this is something Rob's really interesting on, is how far does 5 years of healing through growing regenerative crops and cereals and non-till in the 5 years when you're not growing spuds, how far back up the healthy soil graph does that get you before you then go and de-stone and go for deep cultivation, destoning, and irrigation for spuds. And then the rest, the stripy land is obviously where we've got heavier land, where we've gone in for cereals, and the non-till system. And he's got one of those fancy drills, which everyone was a bit startled by at first, but it's working really nicely for us. And then the park is in the middle there. So it is about half and half now, because we've taken on a bit more. And we did drop out. I just want last thing on cropping. I mean, I'm not, as I said, I don't want to get too stuck on a deep farming conversation, but we did rather piously drop out sugar beet, partly because the price is on the floor, but also we thought if we're going to have one dirty crop, as in degenerative, in terms of impact on the soil and the environment, it was going to be spuds, because spuds are, are rice, frankly, or pasta. They're the food of England, and probably we could do with less sugar. So, and I was a bit pious about it, thinking, okay, we'll drop sugar beet. Actually, rape's now fallen through the floor, so we brought sugar beet back in. And I think this is the point: it's just a subtle balance, and one's always changing, and it is a compromise. And I think as long as, for us, I feel, a bit like our cattle, we are beginning to finish a few indoors. We went very, very wild outdoor, and we realised actually it's incredibly hard to finish animals for market consistently if you don't finish indoors. And we gave ground on that, because we thought, well, it's all very well being purist, but if it's on the hook and no one wants to eat it, it's completely pointless. So it's a bit the same in the cropping. So that's how the block looks. This is just a quick look at hectares, and so it's very new. When Rob arrived in 2019, we had no non-till land. We're now up to, I think it's a bit more than that now, because we've taken the land in, but it's a big transformation. This is quite small and hard to read, but basically in terms of the carbon producers, diesel, fertilizer, we're just trying to show there the slight drop in fuel, because we're doing less cultivation fundamentally. The beginnings of the drop in fertilizer, because the green crops we're planting after the combine, the manuring from the animals on the land, and all that part of the regenerative cycle, and the non-till, the soil structure is coming back. It is incredible, and it's incredible that actually we. Yeah, I mean, for those of us who, I can remember animals out on the land in the 70s, although they were all on maize, but it is nothing short of incredible that we all left this behind so readily. And, it's a drug, fertilizer is a drug. It was so easy for all of us. Now, obviously, the spike in nitrogen has made people think hard. The changing grant scheme is making people think hard. But it was really a question not that long ago for me of why would you do that, why would you do that, and all the farmers I was speaking to, why would you do that? And now it's just so obviously, well, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, it's just such a big no-brainer, but depending on your land. But this is just showing that in a simpler form. But to justify that, why there's why the last graph is so much more accented than the first two, it's because of the sequestration of carbon that's going alongside the lower use of carbon. And we're just at the beginning. We know we're 5 years into this, so the soil we expect to keep improving. So that's so we've got a big-ish herd of Welsh blacks. My mother's family were Welsh of a kind, and so when I got rid of the commercial, some more perfectly good but commercial animals, looking for a pedigree herd. I could have got red poles or park whites or something from down the road, and I in fact went to Abergavenny and got a load of Welsh blacks, and so now you can imagine getting a bull is just like a hugely difficult thing. But we've stuck with it. I mean, I'm non-biased about cows. I think if you breed well, live well, and hang well, and cook well, I love going to the stockman's tent where everyone argues about their animal, but I think it's lovely that we all fancy different cattle. But we have, the reason I brought this slide in is we're beginning to use them less. I mean, on the very light land, if a very wet winter, you're still ending up having to cultivate after them. Sheep, it's fine. And so we are now, I think it's called bale grazing. So we're putting down some grass lays within the arable and then putting bales on and wintering them on there. Not exclusively, but we're trying to reduce the amount they're on over winter, because, we haven't got a huge amount of land that's dry enough and light enough where they don't really still end up making too much mess. This is the Parkland herd. You can see the hall in the background. So we've got a closed herd here, and you can begin to see the roughing up of the ground. Dad would have said it's a terrible mess, and he'd be right in a sense, but we're kind of holding our nerve. In August, when thistle heads are blowing and making the big barrel U's in the garden sort of look like it's been snowing, and the kind of ragwort red rag-ometer goes sort of slightly like this in the visitor's book, I sort of suddenly think, actually, maybe we should do something about it. But actually then you suddenly get to September and it comes down, and you realise that if you're looking over drone, there's not actually that much of, we've got some quite thick patches of thistle, but over the acreage, it's still less than 20% that's not pretty good grass. We used to cut this, so we haven't sprayed the parks for 20 years, but we stopped cutting in 1920 when Rob, and it was just an obvious thing, he said, look, Parkland grass isn't great, it's rough pasture really, you're not getting great hay off it, you're only getting one cut. If you're serious about feeding animals, you need to be putting it in your arable. It's an obvious thing, and forgive me for those of you who already do this. So now we cut our grass, so the bale grazing fields obviously cut twice, and they're there for winter. So we get a ton of really good hay for the winter, or haylage, and leave the park. So I haven't got the graph for here, but if you think of, we used to have 100 cows coming onto this after the cut in June, and then go back inside. So roughly 80 cows with followers. We've now got 25 cows with 2 years of followers. So the maximum is 2 years of followers. Obviously, we take one of those years out. This year we could have had double the number. Last 22 is pretty difficult. We started putting straw bales in, but we try and, there's no intervention otherwise. They're just allowed to use the whole block. So of course, it's not a huge output of meat. And so if Dad was there saying, well, your duty is to produce meat, and of course that's a fair point, but we could be eating a lot less meat. There's another argument. I mean, as in the planet needs to eat a lot less meat. So in actual fact, and also the grants have come up. So in terms of income, we're now paid, I think, 3 times as much. I'm sorry, I haven't got the number, but it is in the new grant scheme, 3 times as much for this sort of pasture management as before, but we're killing less animals, getting less money from the animals. I have to say, I have a big hang up on what is essentially an affluent middle class product that we're producing. I've got no problem with the fact that we should all be eating less meat, but try selling that into Yarmouth or Lowestoft. So that's where the government needs to play a role. But in real terms, I think there have been quite a few studies on us. You've probably seen them, but we need to be producing about 20% of the meat and dairy that we are for planetary health, because most of the land's producing food for animals, and particularly pig and chicken, which are 2 most popular things, which of course can't live rough. They have to have substrate food, so more land to grow it for. So it's a massive problem. My answer is just to produce. I do care a lot about this as well. I've been to our abattoir up the road. You use it. If you want to go to the 4 a.m. tour when your sugar levels blood sugar's on the floor and see it up close, we all know it's horrible, but I think it's just an ethical responsibility. I mean, I appreciate some of you might be actual stock farmers and you get very close to your animals, and I understand why you wouldn't want to go to the slaughterhouse. But if we can't, as humans, if we can't try and ensure the life they have is as good as it can be, no forced weaning, and a naturalistic herd system in exchange for their life to eat, I just wonder how far off being we've really become. It's pretty grotesque what we're doing, not us, but society, and it bothers me, and this makes me feel better. I'm just worried about the fact that I'm not really producing meat for the market that I live closest to. We've got a motley crew of Highlands off someone down the road. My very clever stockman said, look, I've got these, they're 250 quid each. All your rewilding mates are buying, because Nep had them, English Longhorn, which look lovely, for like 2.5 grand each cow, and good for them. But we got these motley Highlands, some of them are crossbreds, and got a absolutely fantastic bull who looks like he's come out of the Middle Ages. I mean, like even before that, he's the wildest looking thing, huge horns. And he's putting back some quality, and we're gradually thinning out some of the girls. We've got about 20 in that 1,000-acre block. It doesn't take me to explain to you that 400 acres of ex-hard farmed arable has no food value for quite a long time. It's now beginning to have quite a good food value, and the woodland with the kind of pine plantations is all bracken. So there's not a lot of food in there. So although it's a big area, there's not really much food. So we've actually took them down from 20 to about 12 cows, because we want obviously to get some scrub. And some secondary growth. We got quite a lot of broom and gorse coming in, a bit of thorn, not a bit of birch. This is in the 5-year, but it's very light land. It's not like Nappies on boulder clay and 10 more inches of rain. It's like growing on steroids, like blackthorn coming out of the ground. It's just going to be a slower game. And we are intervening in the woodland. Doesn't look like it much, but slowly, because there's a value in it, we're opening up and making it more of a whole landscape, a naturalistic landscape, but also trying to create areas of kind of grazable material, whatever that might be, cross-leaved heath or acid grassland. And there's some pigs and ponies in here too. We did have, you probably read, we had some water buffalo, but everyone got freaked out by them swimming and knocking people over on paddle boards. And actually those collars, I don't know if you've seen them. And I thought it took all publicity is good publicity right to the very edge of reason. And so we sadly got rid of them. Those collars that they say don't work. If they go in water, they just don't work. So we just don't. And we knew we were in trouble. Where there's a very nice guy who was a member at Fritton, and he was on the running machine at 6 a.m. and he then posted on his own media, where else can you work out and look at water buffalo? I mean, hashtag Fritton Lake, blah blah blah. And I think that's when everyone's hair went up on the back of their necks. This is just a split side, but yeah, I think if you think about 100 years, so this was heath planted over in the 20s after the First World War. Those big grants for restocking timber, and it's gone on since then. But and it was sheep grazing. It was actually common, unenclosed and then enclosed. It was still being grazed a little bit up until when my mum married my dad in the sort of 1964 in smaller and pockets. But if you think of 100 years of no animal intervention and bigger and bigger trees, bracken is what I call the floral wolf. It's just completely taken over. Now, I'm pleased to say that some of this, I mean, it looks a terrible mess, and we realise we can't do it only with pigs because they make it almost impossible to go in with a machine because it's so rough. But where they've been, you do get, there's quite a lot of grass seed or acid grasses, pine start to come through. I think we've recognised it's going to be a dual role of pigs and intervention with machinery, or smashing it or crushing it, because you can't really rely on the pigs alone. They get so fat on chestnut. We got a lot of sweet chestnut down there, not a lot of oak. And if you kill them after Christmas, there's like 8 inches. I need to get into the candle making business or something. So they're not really good for selling. They're not really good for selling because we use them in our own kitchen, because obviously there's just too much fat. But we love our large blacks. I mean, with their lop ears, they're good fun. So that's. This is actually not really meant to illustrate anything in particular, but the other thing we've been doing, and there might be one or two in here, I don't know, but we've got out of nowhere an amazing team of wildlife recorders. Almost all of them voluntary. 1 or 2 of them are paid to just do specific, soil-related things. But I mean, the big question always asks me, what's come back? And the answer is, I have absolutely no idea. And anyway, it's probably nothing to do with anything I've done. I mean, butterflies have a bad year because of things way beyond Somerleyton's control. But it is really nice, a little WhatsApp group. And it is lovely that these enthusiasts, moth, bat, wildflowers. Of course, there are things coming back, and the soil is evidently repairing underneath. We did try and get a beaver license, but it's become very complicated in low. We have a group coming tomorrow who are looking at a Dutch group, but looking at pelican reintroduction to the Broads, and they might build a host community on Fritton Lake because it's so private and easy. No one has to worry about fish as a trial. So I'm still kind of interested in that thing, that sort of the reintroduction, but. Most of all, it's very rewarding seeing the recorders recording and understanding what is here, and sharing in their excitement, whether they were here before or whether they're more. I think you need a decade, really. I mean, like, we haven't recorded an adder, we haven't recorded the common lizard in the wild block, you know, so just taking 2 key species. The other part, sorry, that's quite interesting is there's there are lots of these companies. They will come to your farm and give you a kind of a score, fundamentally, charge you an awful lot of money to give you a score, and probably stuff you knew. But there's nothing really to look at here particularly, but other than the fact that this was done in 2020, so quite a few years ago, and you know, fundamentally they're all quite low. I think that's the point. And you know, I think we all need to, and we all know. I know again, I'm preaching to the converted, but we live in a very immediate, self-gratifying, immediate world where everything has to happen now, and it's taken us, say, 50 years. If you take the 1970s as the last time of real abundance, and of course that's been shifting. That shifting baseline is, you can pull it apart, but when we started Wild East, we thought we were kids of the 70s. It's taken us 50 years to really mess it up. It's going to take us 50 years to really mend it. And I think that basically holds true. There are, of course, overnight successes. You know, return of a species. You know, we've had white-tailed eagles on the lake, nothing to do with me, but they've obviously been released and they're all over the Broads now. So there are lots of those iconic things, but I think generally to heal the land, to reconnect, particularly to allow nature to be well and happy like us, it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of change of culture, and it'll be slow. So, and when we got this, I thought, oh my God, barriers to species dispersal. I thought, what, 13? They are hedges. And I said to these guys, because these are rewilding people, this is my mistake. And I said, you've got to change your algorithms, because if you're going to come to farms, we've all got hedges, and if they're going to be barriers, you're going to fall out with everybody very quickly. So they did take that on board, and I think probably have changed it, but. And then finally, going back to our inspiration story, why Wild East? I have to say I've asked that question a lot, particularly in the dark days until we've had a bit of, you know, sadly, a bit of money to spend to sound the alarm again. But I get asked this all the time. You know, why are you doing this? Why did you just shut up and go and carry on your farm? Surely Fritton's keeping you busy. And, you know, I have no idea is the short answer. Dad, I did say that earlier, used to call me a feckless environmentalist. I used to go around cutting ivy off trees, not even realising it's often better to leave the ivy on the tree, particularly when it's sort of well gone. I don't really know where that came from, because Mum, you know, bought Dane pack bacon till the end of her life. Absolutely no interest in the environment, really, unless it was jumping over hedges on a horse. And Dad actually was sort of a traditional conservationist. You know, he didn't rip out hedges. He was tidy, you know, his generation were tidy, so he hated the idea of it looking untidy for visitors, and he was worried about staggy-headed oaks, and was much more worried about, you know, the idea that that's good for nature was supplanted by it being untidy for the visitor. So he'd always send someone up to kind of lock them off. And then, yeah, so and so somehow this combination of genes, and quite late in my life, because I wasn't doing this, got me really fired up about the thing. You know, everything matters. We've all got our thing, and this is, for me, what matters. And I suppose also there's that underdog thing. I mean, you know, it's a bit of an unfair game, us and the natural world. So the more of us are there to tilt the balance, giving it a fighting chance. Humans should be able to look after themselves. Do that quite well. So this is the thing that got me going. So. Yeah, so I sort of was going to finish by saying that for Wild East, you know, our 2025 mission really is to, having finally worked out how to get money off these big corporate giants, is to back solve. I think they use this word in the city. My city friends, back solve. But you know, we've learned a lot from doing that, and it should be a lot easier going forward, because we kind of know what picture to paint and what to say and how to get it. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but I'd love to be able to see the media. It's all about the storytelling, and whether that's you guys telling story. So yes, please do record yourselves or invite me to come and do it. People are great when you put a camera in their face. They're absolutely terrible at doing their own media, almost universally. So we'd love to come and do that. I know you've got a lot of your own. So the millions of tens of thousands of micro interventions, stories on the map of dreams, and big interventions from corporates to fund media to make it more present in our lives all the time is sort of two big things for the future for us. And that is it. So thank you very much for listening. I'm delighted to have such a full room. I've spoke to a lot of rooms where there's like 9 people. It's like being a terrible comedian. And so I really appreciate you all coming out, and I hope it's been of some interest.
Thank you, Hugh. Sounds like Wild East has sort of got out of the valley of death. So any new enterprise comes to that cliff and then...
We're out of the valley of death, pulling nature with us, that's the thing, yeah. Of course, happy to answer questions. So I should have said that. I mean, I almost certainly won't be able to give them good answers, but I'll certainly try.
Yeah. Right, hands up, please. Any questions? Yes.
Most farmers will obviously look at the economics of it.
Yeah.
You've had to do that yourself. How do you actually persuade farmers that you can still get a good bottom line?
Well,
This type of process.
yeah. So obviously, I'm the first. We got a reasonable sized block, and I appreciate that does give us an advantage. And I think we sort of opted into what has become the new grant landscape. And it's quite diverse. There's a lot of water on the marsh, and that's a priority habitat. And there's a lot of sort of money, if you like, being thrown at that. So for the last 10 years and more, we've all known the old single farm payment was going to go. But what none of us knew until really very recently was what was going to replace it. And I think for those farmers in the room, we all agree that we didn't really believe. I certainly didn't believe, or on our farm, we didn't believe that. I thought it would be sucked up by the NHS, but it would be much less. I have to say, at the moment, it has been, a miracle, but also a welcome miracle that the environmental grants have maintained that level. So we have been really well placed. Like, for instance, the wild edges, I now get paid for them, and so I think environmental resilience on a farm goes sort of slightly hand in hand with economic resilience, and I mean, this is speaking from myself. So was it last year there were a lot of West Norfolk, sort of central West Norfolk, who didn't get the June rain that we got, and they're big wheat farmers, and they didn't really get any rain from almost not a crop. Now, okay, that doesn't happen very often, but if you can build in diversity for nature and take a bigger slice of grant money alongside your cropping, it feels to me like a good economic decision alongside a good environmental decision. But of course that doesn't relate to every farm because they're all different, and I suppose that's the thing that I've kind of really not woken up to. I because I knew that before, and also there's culture. There's a cultural barrier that people like to do what they do and they don't particularly want to do it a different way. And I used to be quite hard-nosed about that, and then actually I realised that that's exactly what I've become. I mean, as a 14-year-old son, he's not quite ready to push me out, but there is that sort of, we all become that model of ourselves where you just do what you do. But I mean, it's very tough. Let's face it, it's been very tough for a while. If you're a small, medium-sized farmer, whether arable, just whether it's the only good thing about this is it is a huge drop in input costs. I mean, I think. We don't expect to get more yield really, but it is really significant, the drop in input costs for not much work really, and it becomes really enjoyable. I mean, I think when Rob joined, Rob's quite diminutive and definitely not the strapping guy that Jamie Lockhart was, and who just had a natural command of people and place. And farming is quite macho still. There's the kit and the tackle is people, a lot of the guys like that. And he sort of said to them, and you're going to be fighting over the smallest tractor by the time I've finished with you. And I was thinking, oh my God, they're all going to walk out. But there is a sort of kind of move where of course we've still got big tackle, which are still cultivating and doing. But it's been really nice to see them understand the economic argument and drill into, we are farming, let's say, 2 to 4% less of some fields, leaving those wild edges. But when they begin to see that actually that you're saving tractor time, therefore money, therefore carbon, and contributing to nature and carbon storage around the edge, and then suddenly your input costs are going down because you're putting in green crops, so you're not having to put as much. It's quite compelling economically, and I think that has helped me get my guys anyway, or Rob, I should say, get my guys to change tack and accept that. Certainly for us, it looks good, you know. I mean, but I do. I mean, sorry, it's a long answer, but it's not a very good one. But I do think probably the biggest barrier is culture, and I'm becoming a victim of it myself now because I've got older. But you know, I think. Well, yeah. I mean, I think, you know. So we also just cut the hedges on the day you cut the hedges, because that's when you cut the hedges, and you spray the crop on the day you spray the crop. It's only quite new that people thought, well, maybe I don't need to spray the crop, and you know that's just a new because we've got computers and can tell us or where I don't need to spray as much. But there are still people, certainly the guy who's exited from me, he was still, you know, it's Thursday, the 14th of February, so this is the job we do. And once you start to break that up and think, well, actually, you know what, we've started to put hedgerows, trees in for 10 years, and that's impossible. We don't really have the hunt more, but they go through, or deer go through, or the tractor cuts the tree's head off because it can't see it in the hedge. And actually then we realised, well, there are loads of trees in the hedges already, old trees that we just let, and now we've got these, they've got incredible rootstock, so whether it's blackthorn or field maple, all along, where instead of planting hedges, and you say, well, I mean, Christ, that's easy. Now we're still planting a few, but it's just that's a culture mindset. It's a bit messy, they're a bit shaggy, and you know, to most people's eyes, don't look like the tree that you might expect. But so I think culture. I think it is more culture, and I think it is changing. I mean, I think, you know, you see it on Country Farm, a lot of young farmers who've got a very different mindset.
Well, it's generational as well.
Yeah.
And I think the loss of face of payments is going to force some people to start thinking about alternative income sources, aren't they?
Yeah. You know, there are a lot of people I've been on a talk where there are a lot of people who've just sold land, so really need, you know, there's so many different nuances, but it is very personal. I think where we have got I've got much better is, you know, even in the 5 years since Wild East, is I do at the very top feel, you know what, this is a climate emergency, and we all have to play our part and stop throwing our toys out of the pram. And if the people, funding farmers, say grow nature and as part of your crop, then actually that's what you do, because we've been doing what the taxpayer and the government tell us to do very happily for a whole generation, which was to maximise production at all costs, and that's come at the great cost of nature. So I think I'm sort of, in one sense, if we accept it's very hard to read that this is an emergency and we need to act, then there is no hiding place for any consumer and any farmer. We all actually, and that's kind of what Wild East is about in the Map of Dreams, but you've got to, sticks don't work, you've got to make it a carrot and inspire people to do it rather than try and bully them into doing it, and hopefully we can. Yeah, sorry.
For those of us that don't farm, you're talking about no-till, and you're talking about green cropping. Yeah. Can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, so I might have to get help from a farmer, but so straight after the combine, so if you cut a field of wheat or any, instead of, your next action would be either to leave it over winter as a stubble, which we still do. You can put a light cultivation over it so the seeds chit and then you get a kind of secondary wheat crop. Or you can put in behind the combine, well, many different crops. I mean, but in our case, we're putting in some pollinators for late insects, some brassicas for food for livestock, some turnips or similar to, and so you're basically trying to fix nitrogen into the soil instead of putting fertilizer in, feed the animals that are going to come and graze it, which also manure further.
Ordinarily, you wouldn't.
No, ordinarily you just go straight over, well, I mean, depending on the farm. In the old days, obviously you'd leave it over winter anyway, but you just put yours straight into plough for your next crop, which might be wheat or potatoes or sugar beet, whatever it is.
So you crops are fertilising?
Yeah, so so fundamentally you're fixing nitrogen into the soil.
Yeah, and they're fodder for
the animals. Well, most people rent sheep. We've got our own, but you know, there's endless people wanting. So they then further manure over the winter, eat the crop down, and then you just do a light sort of scrape over the top, like cultivation, but no ploughing. And you can do that kind of forever. I mean, as in non-till means non-till, so you don't then go back. There are nuances a little bit within that, like the cattle, we do have to slightly pull it over because they're heavier and they make more of a mess, but it's a better mess than a heavy tractor.
So you fertilised the field, and then there's something else you passed over very, very quickly. You talked about Rob's fancy drill.
Oh, sorry, yeah, so he's got a low disturbance drill that is just, yeah, so normally you'd be making a very fine tilth to put for your seed bed, and then you'd have a conventional drill over the top. This is just, it's got big fat tyres, basically looks a bit low ground pressure, and it just fires the seeds into on a big sort of wheel. I mean, it's a cool bit of kit, and that, yeah, it's a low disturbance drill really. It's nothing magical about it. It's still a drill, but it's pushing the seed a little bit in because you haven't got that tilth that you would have if you were doing, say, traditional drilling.
So going back to the economics, you've reduced the fertiliser.
Yeah. So the big field time. So save time is field time. So that's the hours that a man is being paid in a tractor. Carbon is obviously the carbon you're burning, the tractor's burning, but also the fertiliser, the chemical fertiliser is carbon. And then the nature is that the soil is coming back to life. So most soils have been hard farmed, are practically dead in terms of there's no kind of organic matter left in the soil, so that begins to come back, and that again helps your next year's crop. And then saving, well, that's a sort of nature. So time, nature, carbon. What was the fourth one? Save time, save money. Yeah, sorry, money. Yeah, so your input costs are the biggest part alongside machinery for all of us. You're buying. It spiked over £1,000 a tonne. It was a couple of years ago, but that got people focused on, hang on a minute, I literally am going to not be able to take a profit out of this crop because the input costs are too high, because you have to put more and more fertiliser on because the soil is unable to support the crop itself.
Are you reducing staff time?
Well, not in terms of overall labour. I mean, actually, we've got because we've gone, our other part, we have grown the livestock in order to be part of this system. So we've actually grown our overall labour, but we haven't changed so we haven't lost men. They just have more time to do other stuff, really. So instead of bringing people in to do some of the hedge laying or some of the woodland work, they're able to spread out, and we rely slightly less on other contractors.
Thank you.
Yeah. But it's no one really is expecting miracle yields. We've gone like that since the war. Yields have gone up and up and up, and it's a utopia. My God, when's this and never? And then towards the 80s and into the 90s, that just began to falter. I'm not saying that there's not advances through genetic cropping, and that's another thing altogether. But the improvement of your margin is a reduction of input costs and time, not really the improvement of yield. But yields are still very good. Yeah.
Yes, Carl. You sort of answered the question there, where your yield was, back in 2019 to where you are. Did you see a drop when you started in the no-till on your? Well,
I mean, yeah, a little bit. To be fair, a little bit, because obviously, a bit like the wild block wasn't able to support the animals with food. There's a little bit of a drop off, because obviously the soil that you've just stopped hard farming hasn't really regenerated in any way. And so, if we could, you'd probably leave it fallow for 2 or 3 years, but of course we can't. So, but pretty quick. I mean, that's the thing that is incredible. I mean, I'm not the expert, but there's all those books on soil. It is, if given the chance, whether it's in your wild patch or in the back of your garden or on your farm, to self-heal, it's pretty quick. I mean, in 5 years, we've been doing it 5 years now, but. Sorry.
Do some soil tests before you started your.
Yeah. So in
your organic match change from then to now.
Yeah. I should have bought that set of test tubes with all the. I mean, I wasn't quite sure who. And again, there's a lady that some of you know. She's ex-Suffolk Wildlife Trust. Well, maybe she still is, but I think she's retired. But that's what she does for us, and that's one of our paid ones. And because it's kind of the holy grail. It's really interesting. So around the edge of the arable, where we've got these little, call them wild edges, but where it's now 5 years of just being one thing. Obviously, it's better than still out in the middle of the field, but it's not miles, you know, where with non-till, it's not miles. If you then go into the potato land, this is the bit we're really interested in at the minute is, you know, of course we're going to try and do the right thing, and of course in the 4 or 5 years of normal cropping between potatoes, we put it into the same rotation as everything else, so there is improvement. I think it's massive, you know, you're going back, the question is, are you going back more than 5 years in that 1 year or not? And it's not really going to change what we do, because we want to put animals out on that land anyway, and so we want to put the green crops in anyway. But I think one has to accept it's pretty brutal on the soil and the destoning, so makes us feel better, but it's really not doing much.
Question at the back.
That leads on to what I was going to ask about the potatoes. Have you considered trialling sort of alternative methods of growing potatoes, you know, under deep mulch of bracken or straw or that kind of thing?
Yeah, so in case anyone at the front didn't hear, have we trialled non-till potatoes? And actually, I'm delighted to say we have. So we're with a grower in Suffolk who, can't remember his name right at the minute, but one of the big guys. And we said to them, look, we'd like to try this, and they were up for the experiment. It's hard. I mean, there were a few spuds. I mean, first of all, the deer was a bit of a problem because they came and kicked around the straw and found what was underneath. It doesn't. So there are people doing it on bigger scales. What's hard to imagine is it being on a field, industrial food production scale. We didn't really get. I mean, we picked up a small bag of small spuds, took them home, and thought, kind of, hooray! But you know, it's interesting, and we only did it 1 year, 2 years ago, on some quite light land. It did have the irrigation, so because it was on a potato field, so the field was being irrigated, so it was not disadvantaged, but it feels like there's some way to go. I mean, I'm more, if anyone wants to come and experiment, it's going to be an area of interest going forward, but I think it feels like it's a bit of a way off at the moment. I mean, I'm not the right person to ask really, but certainly from what I learned, it was fun, but not very productive.
We can do it on a small scale. We can do it on a small scale, but you can't.
Yes, yeah. I mean, in the garden you can do it. Yeah.
Right, Bob.
Yeah, for the area where you're actually doing the rewilding,
Yeah.
400 acres or whatever, did you have to put in miles of fences like they did at Net, or?
Yeah. So the so the unlucky part of that, I should have said, it's 10 kilometres around the whole perimeter, and about half of that is ex-arable, or sorry, the border is ex-arable, and half of it is wood. And there is no, well, most of the woods had just a simple barbed wire anyway, like we all kind of do, but pretty knackered. And so when we got into the capital grant, we got capital grant for everything that was against arable, but not against the wood. So we had to self-fund that, and that was kind of a rather unpleasant part of it. We didn't put in deer fence. I mean, that was partly because of that, just the extra cost, but also, I mean, some of you know, I know you're all from around here, but well, let's face it, too many deer, but it seems to be that we're a bit of a sink. I mean, as in there's a bit of woodland around us, they'd like it there, and they're already there, so we didn't really want to fence them in or out. And so we just went for an ordinary stock fence, you know, so and we put a few rails in where we know they move between Richard Beaver on the north side of the road and us, and then up from the other side. But yeah, so you do get a capital grant for the arable, but not for the woodland. So it's so I need to get some meat out of that at some point, meat and timber.
Yes.
Your maps seem to show quite a big area of tenant farmers. How do they fit into this?
On the estate map. Yeah. So I not until very recently. So I now have two. So that yellow block was actually 2 farms, and one of those gave up a year ago. I mean, to be fair, he hadn't been on the farm himself for 20 odd years. He'd been subcontracted, but he was retired and downsized and there was a payment, I'm not sure what it was called, but the government were offering a kind of roll up of single farm payment to try and, I think the idea was to try and kickstart new life in farming, and in this case that new life was me rather than some young buck wanting to do some incredible stuff. But I have to say it came at a very good time, because it's some of the best land, and some of the best land for certainly non-till farming. It's as near as we get to grade 1 land. It's not grade 1 land. Edward, who's the last arable tenant, is on about 400 acres of very light land, no irrigation. He's probably, he did tell me the other day, I mean, quite a big chunk of it is in, not necessarily in, not rewilding at all actually, but in those sort of arable options where you plant something and then don't harvest it. I can't remember what it's called. I mean, he's not producing a lot of food. I gave him a bit of a hard time, said, come on, you've got to produce some food. But it's easy for him. He's a one-man band, not much machinery. And I think he's, financially reasonably well off. So he's in a good position. And then the last one that's still farming is a cattle farmer who's in Somerleyton village and has about 50 acres of land and marsh and rents grass all over the Haddiscoe level. I have to say, it's a good point, but I should say this because I need to, when we were, just to finish, because I know you've all want to go, but when we saw the drop in single farm payment, and for us that was like 120 grand or 130 grand, it's a lot, what can we do to replace that? Because we absolutely were certain it has come in grants, we were absolutely certain it wasn't going to, or a lot of it wasn't going to. And actually I sat down with Rob and said, well look, we need to, we had grass rented to all sorts of graziers, as you do, and although we had a few hobby cattle, they were just there kind of for fun. And we thought, well, we can't grow the arable because we haven't got any, we have to buy land to do that. So we took a very clear decision to grow a very sustainable, regenerative livestock unit. So that's about now 500 sheep, 500 ewes, and about 120 cattle, because we've got park and wild block, and then the ones on the level. But we did push off, and I did write to someone in Natural England about this, but I said, the fact that you haven't given any clarity means people like me, they can make economic decisions. And so we took back all our grass along the Somerleyton and Herringfleet marshes. One of those tenants was my tenant, sorry, one of those graziers was my tenant. And it was very difficult. I went to him and said, look, my dad never gave me any grass. They were absolutely classic landlord, tenant, hammer and tong, all the way through their lives, having big bust-ups. And I went down to Bruce and said, look, we need to move on from this. Why don't you rent the level? It's right down the road from where you live. And to go back to him 12 years later and say, that system, it's only, I was getting less than £1,000 a year rent for the grass. And we realised that we could make up most of that 100 grand in having our own business. So I was acutely aware that a lot of smaller graziers in my particular area lost a convenient grazing because of our decision to power up in that sector. So there were impacts, right? I'm very conscious of that. But anyway, he's still alive, so it's not all bad. But but it just was a real impact. And I guess this is what happens when governments make big decisions. They can see through some of the issues, but not all of them. A bit like the current one with IHT. Okay. Well, look, you probably want to. Sorry. Yes.
A while back, you mentioned about bringing wilding to the tourists. I wondered what your plans were, let's say, for next year. Yeah,
so I mean, so Fritton Lake is not really wild tourism. I mean, it kind of is, but because the tourism are already established, they're sort of cabins, and it's not like wild camping. We're not really doing that, and I don't think I'm going to, just because I've got to focus on one thing. But there are a few people. I mean, up at Ken Hill, you can fly camp, I think, and I think at West Acre you can. But I think what we really want to do is populate the map with people who are going, beyond the call in what they're doing, whatever that, whether it's an Airbnb or a caravan or a campsite or a farm where you can visit or camp, all those sort of things, is have a layer that is we loves, and just celebrating the people that are already doing a lot, food producers. So the real big push for the next, we have got a few already, but we obviously have to get their permission. Most of them are very happy to be, a lot of them don't need us. They're bigger than us probably in some respects, but what I really want to do is get East of England Tourism Board, which I'm sort of on, but to start thinking of Wild East being a good, soft one way of celebrating the region, one way of referring to the region. I mean, I love that sign on the A12, welcome to Wild East. So there's an inspiration story at a place in Montana called American Prairie Reserves, and they're doing kind of huge scale rewilding, and there's no one that lives there, so it's easy, it's different. But in great American gusto, they're just full of positive energy, and they're very good to us at the beginning, and they had an app. And the thing that I really crystallized, maybe why do this, but people who live in, this is Montana, but live and visit and work or fly through, whatever they're doing, they're driving around, and it says, American Prairie Reserves. They've got a cooler kind of sub-brand, which is sort of anyway, whatever it is, wild something. And the original idea was, but the point is that people started clicking donating, fundamentally because they just thought, wow, this area, these people have got this stuff right, it looks good, it feels good. They looked at the thing and they started donating, and they had this huge problem. What the hell to do with the money was, as in how to democratically use, it wasn't huge sums, but people weren't saying, I'd like you to give money for that farmer. They were just saying, I think this is amazing. A bit like at the bottom of when you pay, okay, I'm happy to do this. That is what success looks like. If we could have people coming up the A12, seeing Welcome to Wild East, hitting an app that celebrates the good and allows them to donate to I don't know how to spend the money, but that would be nice, because it's not about the money, it's about the fact that the recognition of collective responsibility that the region's taking for itself. And that's exciting, but it's a long way off. It's hard, pledge by pledge, it's a sort of tough gig.
It's so important to involve young people. Do you think Wild East has got a...
Well, that's slightly why we ended up, it took a lot of, we were so talking about that thing of being stuck, we were so stuck on our old website and the kind of green and old mission statements and everything, and we went out to market and we actually did some research and talked to people in and around the area. What do you think of Wild East? And it was completely boring. Most of the young people have no idea what it is, it's boring. And we said, well, you don't understand the map of dreams. Dreams don't come true. It was just all stuff and it was really good because of course it was our little thing, and we thought, well, hang on a minute, it was very popular when we launched, but it was just a good home truthing exercise. A lot of people, in a quite hard pressed place like Leiston, it was a humbling, really. Dreams, if already is, they don't come true. My life's shit, sort of thing. And actually I was thinking, well, hang on, everyone dreams. So we had this long argument, but the refresh and the colours was definitely aimed at trying to make it more youth appealing, more energetic, and less more like conventional conservation. The proof will be in the podding. It only hasn't been live for that long, but yeah.
Yeah, the two local groups I'm involved with, if you're 60-year-old, you're young.
Yeah, I know, well that's exactly it. And I'm sort of now rapidly, we need to I need to be like all these other sort of celebrity chefs and people to get my children they did do a lot of media, they've all become way too self-conscious. When they were young, I've got a really funny video of Johnny singing a reskinned version of that Wet, Wet, Wet song that was on in Four Weddings and a Funeral. But with a nature theme, so we changed the lyrics. I feel it in my fingers, I feel it in my toes, nature is all around me. Just feel it grow or something, and it's just hilarious because he was like 6 and he's very good. But I showed it to him, and now I said, could you redo this, but we'll make it really professionally, and we'll put a Lynx face on you to give it so it's not you, and it's no way, I'm not doing that. I don't blame him, but the point is, it'd be great to get young people involved in that way.
Any more questions?
Last one, Roddy.
Yeah, sure.
People here want to engage with the map of dreams then on the website?
Yeah, so sorry, I would love it if you did one thing and that's just signed the thing. Even if you don't have anything or don't want to share anything, initially it'd be a good test. It should work. And it should be just a question of, just being able to put your name in, your address, or not necessarily your address, but your postcode, or just so it geolocates you but doesn't necessarily tell you where you live. I appreciate that. And better, the next leg is just to post a video that we can upload and share to inspire other people. That is it. If you'd like us to come and film you, because it's always better quality, then we'd love to do that, and that we're just emailing in, and we'd definitely come do that. And we are now funded to do at least a bit of that. So, You know, if there were 10,000 people on the map and there were 1,000 videos, that would be great. If there were 10,000, that'd be amazing. But it's not going to happen because I need another life to get through it, or more money to pay more people to do it. But yeah, I'd love it if you engage in that way. Of course, that'd be amazing. I'm not a very good salesman, but that would be great and a nice way to close.
When you first started, you told me I was the first one.
Yes. Yeah. So if everyone should follow your lead. I hope it wasn't like Fort Knox. It should be easy. So if nothing else, you can be test, and then you can say it's still impossible. But I hope it's easy.
20% sounded good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you.